I never expected her to remember my name, let alone everything else. It started in the kitchen, though not in any way that would have felt important at the time. I was there on an ordinary Thursday evening, leaning against the counter while she poured tea into two mismatched mugs. She glanced at me over the rim of her glasses, paused, and smiled just enough to make me forget what I was doing for a moment. "You like it strong?" she asked, setting one mug down in front of me. I nodded because, yes, I liked it strong. And yes, she remembered. I didn't say anything else, just wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic, letting the steam curl against my fingers. It was quiet, almost too quiet. I liked that. We didn't need to fill every space with words. I caught her watching me from time to time, the kind of look that lingered just enough to make me aware of how still my own body had become. My fingers fidgeted with the napkin beside my mug, folding it into small, careful triangles while she stirred her tea. I had been friends with her son for years, but somehow her presence had always felt separate, untouchable. That night, though, she shifted something without meaning to. A laugh, soft, almost apologetic, escaped when I mispronounced a word from a book she had lent me. I hadn't expected that either, for her to hear me, for her to care. Her eyes, a muted green, flicked toward my hands, paused on the knuckles I had tucked under my chin. "You're still writing in that notebook?" she asked. I shrugged, embarrassed. I hadn't written anything important in months, just lines I never sent, thoughts I didn't want anyone to read. "Sometimes," I said. She nodded, and I realized she understood without needing me to explain. There was something in the tilt of her head, the way her hand hovered over the edge of her cup before setting it down, that made me feel like a private audience to something fragile. I wanted to ask what she was thinking, but I didn't. The clock ticked somewhere behind us, small and rhythmic, and I noticed the way she shifted in her chair, pulling her cardigan tighter over her shoulders. Her lips pressed together for a moment before she smiled again. Small, knowing, secretive. My stomach tightened, the kind of ache that isn't painful but impossible to ignore. I sipped my tea, trying to focus on anything else. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint smell of bread from earlier, the uneven lines of the floor tiles. Yet my eyes kept drifting to her hands, the way they lingered on the mug before curling around it, or how she adjusted her glasses and seemed unaware of the subtle impact she had. And then, just before I left, she said something so casual it almost didn't register. "Don't forget to come by tomorrow. There's something I want to show you." I blinked, paused, and somehow knew it wasn't about the tea, or the book, or even the notebook. My throat tightened, but I said nothing, just nodded. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod in return, and then she was standing in the doorway, the kitchen lights soft behind her, and I was suddenly very aware of how ordinary the room had felt before her presence had changed it. I walked out into the night, hands shoved into my jacket pockets, stomach still twisting. That ordinary Thursday felt strange now, suspended, waiting. And somewhere in the quiet of that pause, I realized that my life, small, habitual, contained, had just tilted in a way I didn't fully understand yet. The next day wasn't promised, but her words lingered, and I kept imagining what she might show me, and why I suddenly wanted to know. The next evening, I found myself back in her kitchen, even though part of me had promised I wouldn't. She was slicing apples at the counter, the knife catching the light in a way that made me pause. "Mom always made pies this way," she said without looking up, voice low, almost a confession, even when we were late for school. I nodded, letting her words settle around me. It wasn't much, a simple memory of someone else's life, but it made her real in a way I hadn't expected. My fingers drummed against the mug beside me. I wanted to ask more, but didn't. Instead, I just listened and watched the subtle curve of her shoulders, the way the soft cardigan slipped just slightly as she reached across the counter. The risk wasn't lost on me. She was my friend's mother, freshly divorced, living in a house where my footsteps had always been careful and respectful. Every glance I stole at her felt like trespassing. I imagined her son noticing, imagined the look he might give me if he knew, and the ache in my chest was sudden, sharp, almost enough to make me leave. But I stayed. She handed me a slice of apple, warm from the pan, and our fingers brushed. It was nothing, really a fleeting contact, but my pulse picked it up like it had weight. I caught her eyes, those green eyes, and felt her hand linger for a second longer on the counter. She smiled, soft, unspoken, and I realized that the kitchen, ordinary and quiet, had started to feel dangerous in a subtle, delicious way. We drank tea together, sitting side by side at the small table, the silence stretching in both directions. I noticed how she twirled her spoon absent-mindedly, eyes half-lidded, lips slightly parted. I wanted to imagine what it would feel like to reach across, touch her arm, lean closer, but the thought came and went as quickly as it appeared. "I used to keep journals," she said suddenly, almost too quietly, stirring her tea. "Not anymore. I used to write everything I couldn't say aloud." Something twisted inside me. That was me, too. The unsent messages, the scribbled lines, the things you never share because they're yours alone. I wanted to tell her that, but my voice stayed in my throat. Instead, I nodded, letting the shared silence say what words couldn't. When she finally stood to clear the mugs, I noticed her hand tremble slightly, subtle enough that it might have been nothing, might have been everything. I found myself wanting to steady it, to offer some silent reassurance, but I didn't. I just let the moment hang, stretched between the clink of porcelain and the quiet hum of the refrigerator. Before I left, she stepped toward me and brushed a stray strand of hair behind my ear. It was casual, maybe accidental, but it lingered longer than it should. I didn't pull back. I couldn't. I only swallowed, nodded, and left, feeling the ache of something unspoken settle deep in my chest. I walked home thinking of her memory of pies, her journals, the tremble in her hand, and I realized that the ordinary had quietly become something I couldn't ignore. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. I stayed longer that evening than I should have, mostly because I didn't know how to leave. She was perched on the edge of the sofa, knees tucked under her, sipping tea in that quiet, careful way that made me want to sit closer, but I didn't. Not yet. Her eyes flicked to mine once, then away, like she wasn't sure she wanted to see me looking at her. I tried to focus on the rim of my mug, tracing the cracks in the glaze with my thumb. "You're quiet tonight," she said, voice low, almost hesitant. I shrugged because what could I say? That I wanted to reach out and close the tiny distance between us, but didn't dare. That I wanted to hear her laugh again, the soft one that made my chest ache. I just nodded. The air shifted. I heard the front door open down the hall. Her son. Not unexpected, not unusual, but it made my chest tighten anyway. She froze, spoon halfway to her mouth, and I felt the sharp edge of everything forbidden. I sipped, silently willing him to move quickly past, but he lingered a moment too long, dropping his backpack with an echo that made both of us jump. She cleared her throat, standing a little straighter, tucking the mug into her hands. I stood too, because we both knew the spell had broken. My pulse hadn't slowed yet, though. We moved to the kitchen, and I helped her load the dishwasher. She didn't ask for it, didn't say anything, just let me. My hands brushed hers, once, twice, lingering longer than necessary, and we ended up on the park bench, though neither of us had planned it. The streetlights cast long, lean shadows across the pavement, and the air smelled faintly of rain that had passed hours ago. I kept my hands in my pockets, shoulders tight, trying to measure how close I could sit without crossing some invisible line. She didn't speak at first, just leaned back, letting the chill settle on her cardigan, and stared at the lamplight reflections on the wet asphalt. I watched her fingers curl around the edge of the bench, tapping lightly. The sound was rhythmic, almost comforting, almost like a warning. "I saw him today," she said finally. Her voice was quiet, hesitant, careful. I froze, caught between curiosity and dread. "Saw?" I asked. "My son," she admitted. She glanced at me for a fraction of a second, then looked away. He mentioned you. About the tea, about the notebooks, about staying too long." I swallowed. My pulse went sharp. The thought of him, watching, judging, unaware, made something coil in my chest. "I didn't," she started, then stopped. Took a breath. "I didn't want him to know. I don't. I shouldn't have let it get this far." She wasn't accusing. She was confessing. The edges of her words trembled. My stomach twisted, but I couldn't speak. I wanted to reach for her hand, steady her trembling, but I stayed frozen in the awkward space between wanting and knowing I shouldn't. The wind picked up, brushing past the benches, scattering leaves in small spirals. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, slow, deliberate. Her eyes found mine. That look, it wasn't just acknowledgement. It was worry, fear, maybe desire, maybe guilt, maybe all of it tangled together. I imagined what it would feel like to close the distance, to tell her exactly what I'd been thinking, what I'd been feeling every time our fingers brushed, every time she laughed softly at my stupid jokes. But I didn't. Not yet. I don't know if I'm making it worse, she murmured. Her lips pressed together, like she was holding back more than words. I don't know if you even understand. I opened my mouth. My throat tightened. The words didn't come. I leaned slightly forward, closer than I should have, feeling the faint heat radiating from her side. My hands twitched, fingers brushing against my own knees, the urge to reach out battling with every quiet, learned restraint I had. The silence stretched, long pressing, electric in the way that small spaces can become when walls come down slowly. Then she asked, quietly, almost to herself, "Do you ever wonder what this could be?" The question hung between us, heavy, unresolved. I wanted to answer. I wanted to close the gap, or at least shake her hand for courage, or just speak something true. But I didn't. We sat there, the wind, the leaves, the dim lamplight around us. Waiting. I felt her stiffen. She didn't pull away, but I could feel the hesitation in the almost imperceptible shift of her shoulders. We worked side by side in silence, the clink of dishes louder than it should have been. I kept imagining what it would be like if her hand stayed in mine, if she leaned closer just slightly, if she let me stay a little longer in that quiet space. My fingers itched to test the line we weren't supposed to cross. She finally turned to me, eyes scanning my face, searching maybe, judging maybe, and I felt something like panic, or longing, or both. I opened my mouth. Nothing. My words stuck. "You should go," she said softly. Just that. And I could tell she meant it. Or maybe she didn't. I didn't know anymore. I nodded, stepped back, and for a second, she hesitated too. I thought she might reach out. I thought she might. My chest tightened, breath caught. Then she did something small. So small I almost missed it. Leaned in, just the slightest, and brushed her lips near mine in a motion that was half gesture, half accident, half everything. I froze, almost daring to close the gap, almost daring to risk it, but didn't. The moment ended in silence, her eyes lowering, mine following, both of us aware of how close we'd been and how far we still were. I left with the taste of tea and hesitation on my lips, feeling the weight of what we hadn't said, and almost had. I showed up the next evening, the one I thought she'd saved for me, and the apartment felt wrong. Empty in ways that had nothing to do with furniture. The kettle was on, but no one stirred. The mail sat unsorted. I called her name softly, half expecting her to appear from the kitchen, laughing about something trivial. Nothing. I lingered in the doorway, hands in my pockets, trying to convince myself she had just stepped out. But when my phone buzzed later, it wasn't her. Just a message from someone else. A casual mention of dinner plans with her son. Nothing more. The next day, she didn't answer my texts. Or my calls. She had always answered. She had always remembered. And now, silence. I kept imagining the reasons. Work, errands, fatigue. But part of me knew it wasn't that simple. There was something unsaid, heavy between the lines of all the ordinary messages she hadn't sent. Something that didn't need words to make itself felt. I saw her from across the street a week later, carrying groceries, her shoulders curved against the afternoon sun. She didn't notice me, didn't look up, and my chest tightened in a way that made walking past her almost unbearable. My steps faltered, my hands clenched, then I kept moving. The complication hit me slowly, like a shadow stretching across familiar walls. She had an ex, someone I had never met, someone she still spoke to. I realized someone who belonged in the spaces she had made for me in her kitchen, in her eyes, in her soft silences. I hadn't known. I hadn't guessed. And now, every imagined possibility twisted into something darker. The thought of her whole life moving around me, without me, left me hollow. I tried to distract myself. Walked past the coffee shop where she poured tea. Past the park bench where our hands almost touched. Tried to focus on the notebook I carried, but the words felt brittle, meaningless. Each small routine, each remembered gesture, reminded me of what I couldn't have. I wanted to knock on her door to ask if we could anything, but I didn't. I stood outside, frozen, imagining her in the apartment, imagining her looking out the window, imagining a life that had nothing to do with me. And then I went home, leaving the seat empty, leaving the text unsent, leaving the small heat of possibility just beyond my reach. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. I found her in the kitchen again, though it had taken me days to work up the nerve. The apartment smelled faintly of old bread and rain. She was at the counter, peeling a clementine, slow and deliberate, as if the motion could absorb thought. I didn't know if I should speak or just leave. Every instinct told me one thing, but my feet had already crossed the threshold. She glanced up, saw me, and paused, knife still in hand. There was no surprise in her eyes, just that same careful, quiet acknowledgement that had haunted me for weeks. "Hey," I said, and it sounded small, unworthy of the weight in my chest. "Hey," she replied, voice even measured steady. I wanted to say everything. How I'd thought about her every time my fingers hovered over my notebook. How I'd imagined her smile. How the empty benches and silent streets had felt like punishment. But the words lodged in my throat. She noticed, of course. I could see it in the way her fingers pressed a little too tightly against the clementine peel, in the tilt of her head, the pause before she spoke. "You don't have to," she started, then stopped, the sentence hanging like smoke in the kitchen. I shook my head. "No, I should." I swallowed, hands gripping the edge of the counter. "I didn't come here to just sit." Her eyes softened, but she didn't move closer. "Not yet." "Okay," she said just that. And it was enough and not enough. I spoke anyway, quietly, carefully, like stepping on glass. I think about you more than I should. I know it's impossible, but my words faltered, trailing off. She didn't recoil. She didn't correct me. She just set the knife down, leaned against the counter, and let the silence fill the spaces where we couldn't finish sentences. I realized then that the choice wasn't about confessing or hiding. It was about staying here, in the room, aware of what we were risking, aware of what we could never let fully exist. And for a long moment, we just looked at each other. Nothing moved but the steam rising from the mugs on the counter. I noticed the faint tremor in her hand, how she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I reached out, slow, careful, and touched her wrist just above the clementine peel. Not a grab, not a claim, just a reminder we were both human, fragile, tethered to the same quiet ache. She looked down, then back at me, and a small, real smile appeared. Not dramatic, not a promise, not an answer. "Okay," she said again, soft, letting me hear it, letting me feel it. And that was the connection. Enough. I stepped back, letting the moment breathe, letting us both exist without pretending we could solve it. And in that ordinary kitchen, with ordinary fruit and ordinary mugs, the tension didn't vanish. It softened, like rain sliding off a window pane, leaving everything wet but quiet. We didn't cross the line. We didn't make vows. But for the first time, it was okay that we were here, in the half-light, with nothing more than acknowledgement and the simple weight of being seen. Weeks passed, or maybe months. The days blurred together, black coffee in the mornings, half-read notebooks left open on the kitchen counter, the soft hum of the fridge filling the quiet spaces. She still brewed tea sometimes, the way she always did, pouring it into mismatched mugs that I had learned to recognize. And I still lingered, though differently now, not out of longing so much as habit and understanding. We returned, slowly, to the routines that had once been ordinary, walking to the corner store, pausing at the park bench we had nearly crossed lines upon, and sharing stories about things neither of us needed anyone else to hear. It wasn't dramatic, not cinematic in the way movies promised, but it was ours. Quiet, steady. One morning, 8:47 a.m. I found her humming while waiting for the kettle to boil. She didn't notice me at first, or maybe she just didn't care, and I watched her tilt her head, smile to herself, tracing the edge of her mug with a finger. I realized then that it wasn't the intensity of stolen glances or almost confessions that mattered. It was these tiny, repeated motions, the mundane intimacy we had quietly carved out, that made everything feel enough. We didn't need words for acknowledgement anymore. A flick of an eyebrow, a brief pause in conversation, the tilt of a mug toward the other. These small gestures said everything we had once struggled to voice. She handed me a slice of apple one evening, our fingers brushing, and it felt familiar like the first time, but less like temptation and more like belonging. Sometimes, life reminded us of the past, the son's laughter down the hall, a voicemail left unsent, a notebook unopened, but it didn't unsettle us. We had learned to let the ache of almost sit beside the comfort of now. We weren't reckless. We weren't dramatic. We were careful, aware of the lines we could and could not cross. And in that awareness, in that quiet recognition, there was a closeness that didn't need to be shouted, only felt. I watched her one evening, her hands folded around a steaming mug, eyes on the darkening sky beyond the window. She glanced at me, almost imperceptibly, and the corner of her mouth lifted. I smiled back. Nothing more, nothing less. Enough. The bench remained, still worn at the edges, still waiting in the park, but we rarely went there anymore. Not because it held danger, but because we had found a new space for ourselves, a kitchen corner, a shared cup of coffee, a nod that meant more than conversation could. And as I sipped my tea that night, I realized that love didn't have to declare itself loudly to exist. It could linger in the small warmth of a hand brushing a mug, in quiet routines, in the moments when someone simply sees you and lets it be. We didn't cross the lines that once terrified us. We didn't need to. And somehow, in that gentle containment, life felt fuller, steadier, and quieter than anything I could have imagined. I didn't need words to know it. Some things are understood only in the small, everyday gestures you share with someone who knows exactly what silence is worth.